This material is made available to you by or on behalf of the University of Melbourne under Section 113P of the Copyright Act 1968. It may be subject to copyright. For more information, visit the University Copyright website.
All right, so I'll just start the record button. And let's start off with this week's lecture. So I might just share my screen. Should all have access to these slides. You see those slides okay?
Yep.
Okay, so we're in week 4. Doesn't seem, and I don't know, it doesn't look promising that we're going to meet in a classroom. Kayleen, what do you think?
I think the current lockdown will be until 2nd of September. So
Until
I
when?
think 2nd of September.
Oh, that's officially when it is at the moment. But what do you think? It's going to go beyond that or not?
I just talked to Hao, and then we thought that maybe we are not able to go back to campus in this semester.
Yep.
So
yep. I don't think we're going to go back anytime soon, which is really frustrating from my point of view. It must be very frustrating from your point of view as well, because it's difficult to...
suppose I should be supporting the role of BFL.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And Kayling and I have spent time preparing for the classroom that we've got set up at Melbourne Uni, and Kayling was going to work the cameras as I walked around the classroom and presented the lecture material. All that's gone. We won't be doing that, certainly not in the short term. So I know it's very frustrating. So let me just check in with you and see how you're going. If you're struggling with some of the material, let me know and we'll make up some classes that we can do at your convenience. If you're struggling with assignment 1 in particular, let me know and we can spend some more time on that. So I'm in your hands. I'm happy to help. You just let me know where you need the help and we can focus on it that way. So as I said, this is week 4. We've got week 5 next week is about litigation and how we handle litigation. And week 6 is looking at other forms of property-based taxes, in particular land tax. We also have a look at what they do in other states around Australia. So tonight's class is really the last class that we're finishing off on the rating techniques and systems in Victoria, especially within the local government area. So after tonight's class, you're all expected to be experts in the rating valuation side. Within a couple of weeks, you're then expected to be an expert in the rating and taxing side. And then after that, we start in compensation, which I think is going to be exciting for all of you, but there's a lot of theories and topics to get familiarised with, and I don't want to get too far ahead, but I'm hoping that you've got an understanding of some of the definitions that we've covered in the last couple of weeks, and that's in relation to site value, capital improved value and net annual value. In particular, the difference between capital improved value and the Spencer definition of market value. Now, we'll spend a bit of time on that tonight because I've got a VCAT case that I hope clearly explains what those differences are and how they might equate to a massive difference in the end figure in the valuation that's being determined. So we'll spend a bit of time on that this evening to make sure, hopefully, that you understand. There's no point me whinging about it. I would have preferred to be talking to you face-to-face in a classroom where I can explain these things a little bit better, but we're stuck with COVID and being online. So just make sure you do have an understanding of the material that we're covering. And if you're struggling a little bit, then reach out to me, let me know. I'll do everything I can to assist through the online virtual world of getting you to understand some of these theories and definitions. Okay, so not only have I've been covering some weird and wonderful definitions in the rating valuation industry, but last week, some of you would have seen this for the first time, but the use of regression analysis in a valuation approach, in a mass valuation approach. So these systems have been used, well, Excel not in particular, but Excel gives you the basis of how a mass valuation is undertaken in a quick turnaround when you're valuing properties that are, it works better when the properties are homogeneous, similar. So you can create what we describe as sub-market groups, and you can value the sub-market groups in one entity. So long as there's no huge differences between those properties, then they can easily be mathematically valued with a pretty high level of accuracy, as long as you've got the correct data. So we looked last week at using regression analysis as a mass valuation tool and how Excel helps in that process. And we looked at graphical displays, which I think are an easy form of getting a quick snapshot view of what the data is. And the skills that you'll learn through this process is an easy fit and a good fit for real estate valuation, but it's a skill that you can transfer to any industry, and any time there's a lot of data which describes a particular set of data, then you can use these sort of techniques to have a really good look at it. So I hope you're looking at it more than just getting through assignment one. You're looking at it as a tool that you can use in your career moving forward. So data analysis is really important. Firstly, before you, especially in valuations, but in looking at any data, to try and understand the data, you need to try and determine the patterns. Once you understand the patterns and how they work, then you're in a good position to then try and predict how they would look like moving forward. And that's where valuation becomes a really handy exponent of using regression analysis. So I won't go into more detail on regression at the moment. We'll spend a little bit more time at the end of the lecture to go through general examinations of data using Excel, and more particularly, you let me know where you might be struggling with assignment one, and we'll see if we can come up with some sort of solutions in relation to that. Any questions on regression analysis and Excel generally? Is anyone having problems activating the data analysis tab in Excel? All good? I haven't got any emails saying that, so I'll assume you're all travelling all well. Good. All right, so let's move on to this week's lecture. What are we going to be looking at? So we're actually going to be covering some court cases, which I know is a little bit tedious, and we're also going to be covering some legislation again. So a little bit dry, but hopefully you'll get something out of it and a little bit more understanding of how the local government valuation, statutory valuation process works, specifically in relation to rating valuations that are used across the state. So we're going to be starting tonight's lecture by looking at a court case known as Merici, and that's between Merici and the Chief Commissioner of State Revenue in New South Wales. Now, why are we looking at a New South Wales case? We're looking at that because this is a valuation dispute and specifically about site value, so it's only looking at the value of the land. But this particular court case went all the way to the High Court of Australia, and we don't normally get a lot of valuation disputes that go that high, that far. So the High Court, as you would recall, I think I've stated that it's the highest court in the land, and for a court case to go there and a decision that came out of it, as valuers, we don't, and property professionals, we don't get that opportunity every day. So this court case happened about 20 years ago, but it's something that that I continually teach in this class, because a lot of good basic information came out of that in relation to undertaking evaluation, and this will also help you. The principles that came out of this court case will help you when we start looking at assignment 2. Now, I know that's miles ahead, but the material in tonight's class and even next week's class is going to be extremely useful for assignment 2 when you undertake that valuation in your own right, which is to determine the value, firstly to determine the valuation of a property for compensation purposes. The method that you do that comes straight out of Merici, and also out of some of the cases we'll be looking at next week. So I'll be having a look at Merici in a few minutes. We're also going to have a look at Valuation's Best Practice Guidelines, which is the Valuer General Victoria's blueprint of how they expect a mass valuation to be undertaken within Victoria. So that gives us some guidance there of what that looks like. We're also going to look at supplementary valuations. So what are supplementary valuations? And I know this gets very confusing. So I think I've already mentioned to you that every property in Victoria is valued every year as at the level of values on the 1st of January every year. So most of those valuations sit there and don't change until the following year. But there are instances where the valuations have to be updated immediately before the next valuation is done. So, for example, if I've got a property today that is vacant land, I would have received a rate notice with vacant land values on them, and that means site value and capital improved value are the same, no added improvements. But if I then next month construct a house, a dwelling on there, they won't necessarily wait until the following year when they do the valuations as at 1st of January 2022. The council will undertake a supplementary valuation, which is an update on those original valuations. So they will include the value of the property with the dwelling. So they'll add the value of the dwelling on the land value. And that's what's called a supplementary. So we'll go into detail later on what constitutes a supplementary and when they're undertaken. We're also going to have a closer look at the Australian Valuation Property Classification Codes, the AVPCC. You're probably asking yourself, well, why didn't he cover that last week? Because that's part of your assignment 1. We can only fit in a certain amount of material, so we're covering that this week. That'll give you an understanding of how those codes came about and what they actually mean. We're also going to look at another court case, 187 Settlement Road, Thomastown. That's a VCAT case. That's a case that I was involved in myself. And it's a good example, I think, of explaining the difference between capital improved value as a rating valuation and Spencer market value definition. So that's really important for you to understand moving forward in this subject. We'll also look at the Fire Services Property Levy and how they came about. That's a brand new levy that came about a few years ago, the newest property-based levy. And I think you're going to find in Australia that a lot more property-based taxes and levies are going to be introduced, because it's probably the simplest system for governments to raise revenue. And I think that's going to expand moving forward for governments that want additional funding for various reasons. So any questions before we kick off? Okay, let's have a look at Merici. And that name is going to sound so familiar to you before you finish this subject. So the court case is known as Anthony Merici versus the Chief Commissioner of State Revenue, which was heard in the High Court of Australia in 2003. And I've got a link there for you, 2 links. So have a look at they're just really summaries of the court case and the decision. So have a look at that, but hopefully you won't need that. You'll get enough information with the the slides that we covered tonight. The court case started, or the dispute rather, started in 1999, where Anthony Morici, that was the property owner's name, and I suppose he's going to be infamous now in the valuation profession because his name is there forever. And he is the owner of a waterfront residential property located in Woolwich, which is a suburb of Sydney. And he appealed against the determination of the Chief Commissioner of Taxation. So that's the equivalent of the State Revenue Office that we have here in Victoria. That's the New South Wales equivalent. And he lodged an objection to the land value, which was determined at $2.44 million by the Valuer General of New South Wales. And that was as at the base date of the 1st of July 1997. So that's what was originally being objected to by Morici against the Commissioner of Taxation. Now, unless any of you lived in Sydney, I don't know Woolwich all that well, apart from this court case, but it's a seaside suburb, so it's coastal. So pretty impressive location on the coast. You could imagine the demand for that sort of a property, and it's generally in an established residential area. Some nice photos there that you can see. What else can I say about it? Attractive suburb and high-end residential land values, generally speaking. So some of the basic information, I suppose, just going back to the photo, what do you need to know about this area? So it's an older residential suburb. I keep saying that we do things better in Victoria. I suppose I'm a bit biased, but in New South Wales, they only value the land for council rates and for raising land tax. They don't value improvements, and they don't return a rental value of any property. So pretty simple system. You might argue, well, that's better, isn't it, to do something where you only have to return the land value of properties in a whole state. You don't have to worry about the improvements. And we'll test that theory if some of you think along those lines. But so a couple of basic bits of information you need to know. Established suburb, so older. Most of the dwellings were built sort of in the 20s and 30s and 40s. So I suppose a suburb like St Kilda here in Melbourne might be similar to what this suburb is like. St Kilda along the coast, along the beachfront. So older properties, redevelopment obviously occurring, but generally properties are developed. And in New South Wales, they're only returning land values. So think about the task of coming up with land values only in St Kilda. What sort of a process would that be like? So that's a description of the task that's ahead of the Valuer General's office. So a couple of points. The objection was lodged to the Valuer General's site value, so land value, on the 1st of the 7th, 1997. So going back a fair bit. The objection was lodged by the owner. That was refused by the Valuer General New South Wales, and therefore they appealed that decision. The property owner appealed that decision to the Land and Environment Court in 1999. Now, the Land and Environment Court is their equivalent to our VCAT here. So they went to VCAT, then that got appealed to the Supreme Court in 2001. And then it went to the High Court of Australia in 2002. So it went all the way up the line to the highest court in the land. So this dispute wasn't going away easily. The outcomes, okay. Some of the decisions that were made. So think about the task of valuing land in St Kilda. How would you go about it? If you were just focusing on land values, then you would probably focus on land sales. The problem with that task, when you're focused on vacant land values and vacant land sales, you forget the obvious things, which is if there aren't any vacant land sales, how do you come up with land value? Anyone want to have a guess? How would you arrive at land values if there aren't any or many land sales? Who wants to have a guess at the answer?
Would it be like, I don't know, like based on like development feasibility kind of method?
So, yep, so you do some analysis to try and come up with a land value. That's what you're saying. That's what a feasibility analysis is, to coming up with lands, maybe looking at improved sales and doing a feasibility backwards. So it's a good answer. The problem with that in New South Wales is that if you're concentrating, so the whole state and all of the valuers doing rating and taxing valuations, they're all focused on vacant land values. That's all they're focused on. They're not interested in anything larger than that exercise. So they're constantly looking for vacant land sales. The problem with that is when you don't have enough vacant land sales, what are you going to do? And the answer to that question is you're going to look at improved sales and you're going to work backwards. That's the job of that. That's pretty basic. And when I keep saying Victoria's got the best system in Australia, because we are one of the few states to have to determine vacant land value, capital improved value, and net annual value, which is the rental value. A lot of the analysis you do in arriving at capital improved value, so improved sales, can be used in determining land values. So if you've got a value of a house, a sale of a house rather, you can analyse what the house adds and come up with a vacant land component part of that sale. But if you're concentrating on just vacant land sales because you're concentrating on vacant land values, you're going to miss that approach. So the first thing that came out of the Merici decision in the High Court of Australia is that it was held the valuation method was unduly selective by the Valuer General, and that a few sales of vacant land were unrepresentative of sales in Hunters Hill. That's the area that the Woolwich was in. So in other words, if you look at the comparison in Melbourne, if you say that St Kilda is similar to Woolwich as a valuation process, then if you were concentrating on just vacant land sales in St Kilda, and then you also took into account vacant land sales of, say, Sandringham, South Melbourne, Port Melbourne, all the surrounding suburbs, you'll probably get a handful of sales that might be useful. But the problem is you're probably missing all of the improved sales that happened around the subject property in St Kilda. There might be hundreds, but because you're concentrating on vacant land, you're going to miss that, and by missing those sales and by not analysing them, you miss out on what the market's doing, the state of the market as at the relevant date. So the High Court was critical of the Valuer General's office in New South Wales, even though their task was to only come up with vacant land values, that just concentrating on vacant land sales is not the way to do it. You need to look at all sales that may be relevant, analyse them, get a good feel for the market, and then decide there what land is worth. So that's why I keep saying Victoria, because we analyse every single sale that occurred, whether it's vacant land or improved, and that gives us an advantage because we get a pretty good feel for the state of the market. Whereas if you're only concentrating on one part of the market, you're going to miss a lot of the evidence that's readily available. So that was the first criticism. The Valuation Land Act did not require valuations to be made in comparison with vacant blocks whose buyers may constitute a special class. The High Court was also critical that sales before or after the base date can be used as long as they are adjusted for the market movement. So what the Valuer General's office was concentrating in New South Wales is leading up to the market as at the relevant date, which was 1st of July 1997. That was the relevant date. They didn't really look at the sales that occurred after the relevant date. And the courts decided you can still use sales both before and after the relevant date, so long as you analyse for the adjustment that has occurred in the market. What does that mean? And this will be part of your valuation exercise with assignment 2. So if I say to you that the relevant date of valuation is the 1st of August 2020, so it's 12 months ago, it doesn't mean that you have to use sales before that date only. But if you know how the market was tracking, then you could use sales after that date. For example, if you, through all of your analysis, you were able to understand that the market moved up or down by, say, 5% per month on either side of the relevant date of valuation, so long as you adjusted the sale price for that, you can use those sales before and after the relevant date to value a property as at that relevant date, being the 1st of August 2020. So the reason we like Merici is because even though it went all the way to the High Court was actually quite embarrassed that the Valuer General New South Wales was making basic errors, and this was a group of professional valuers in New South Wales. They were making pretty basic errors, sort of things that we learnt as students in Valuations 101. And the High Court had to tell the Valuer General New South Wales to redo how they did valuations. So it's a good court case for us to learn as students because it gives us a set of guiding principles that reattach us to the basics of valuations, and that is make sure you are aware of all sales that occurred in the area. But doesn't matter what you're doing, then decide which ones are relevant, but you should analyse all of the sales that have occurred in a particular sub-market group. Second of all, the dates of sales can still be used so long as you make an adjustment on those to the relevant date of valuation that you're undertaking. So what had happened is that the High Court ordered, they didn't make a decision on the valuation itself. They just set a list of principles, and they said to the two parties, go back to the Land and Environment Court and determine what you think in that court is a fair and reasonable valuation, site valuation of your property. So further evidence was then submitted by both parties. Both parties excluded from their consideration all non-waterfront properties. 26 sales were highlighted, so a different approach to the valuation exercise. Prior to that, there was only a handful of vacant land sales. So now there were 26 sales were used. Now, when I say used, were considered. And again, this is going to be very important for you when you're doing assignment 2, because I will give you a list of sales. You need to first consider all of them. Then, once you've considered all of them, then you can determine which one to use for valuation. So of the 26 sales that were used, 19 sales were improved sales and 7 were vacant. So the Valuer General has gone from using 7 sales, because there are only 7 vacant land sales, only to now considering an additional 19. And the important thing is that once he or she considers an additional 19 sales, it's going to make them more in touch with the market that was occurring at that time, better informed, better evidence, and at the end of the day, a better quality valuation that would come out. And if anyone's got any questions while we're moving on this, please just yell out. So principles that were confirmed, sales before or after the date can be used as long as they are adjusted. The analysis procedure adopted was that the contract price was adjusted for movement in the market from the contract date to the base date, after which the value of improvements as at the base date were deducted from the adjusted contract price. So what does that mean? Looking at, even though you're coming up with a vacant land sale, vacant land value, you can use improved sales as long as you analyse the added value of the improvements off the sale price. So that's pretty basic stuff. ABS statistics, so that's the Australian Bureau of Statistics, used to adjust contract prices, have less weight than comparable sales. So what the other side, what Marici's valuers were trying to do was use general statistics in the movement of the market to analyse sales, and that's it's sort of acceptable, but you're better off looking at how the market is tracking by market evidence sales rather than general statistics that the ABS releases all the time, saying, and you hear this every weekend, that the market auction results suggest that the market has moved, 7% in the last 6 months. That's a good and general analysis to have, but the only way you're going to know whether the property you're valuing has moved by that amount is to look at actual sales evidence. In fact, in most cases, comparable sales evidence is more important than anything else. You might use general statistic when you don't have a lot of evidence to move on, but generally speaking, you want to make sure that you've got enough comparable evidence to do your valuation you're undertaking. Therefore, less weight should be given to those sales that occurred further from the base date. Again, that's Valuations 101. If you're doing a valuation as at the 1st of August 2020, a sale a month either side of that relevant date is going to be more worthwhile for you than a sale, say, 6 months either side of that relevant date. So again, the High Court had to re-impress some of the basic principles to the Valuer General's office to say that put more weight on those sales that are closest to the relevant date of valuation. Basic stuff, but it came out of the High Court, so it was important enough for all of us in Australia to listen to. No adjustments were needed to the prices of the vacant land sales on account of the sales being fewer in number than the improved land sales, on account there being any premium on the land derived from vacant land sales. So again, would there be a difference in analysing improved sales, so taking off the value of the dwelling to come back to a raw value, rather than coming up with a pure vacant land value on the few sales that you've got? The Commissioner weighted the sales to give less weight to less reliable comparable sales and to reject or give no weight to any comparable sales from which it would be plainly unreliable to reduce the land value. So there obviously is going to be some circumstances where trying to take the added value of the improvement off is going to be problematic. So you've got to be wise as to which improved sales are worth analysing. What does that mean? So if you've got a property with say like a 100 square metre weatherboard dwelling, that's going to be reasonably straightforward to take off the value of that improvement. But if you've got, say, a 300 or 400 square metre brick mansion, it's going to be more difficult to take the added value of that improvement off. So you've got to be mindful which ones are worth analysing, which improved sales are worth analysing. The breadth of the market should be considered in the market analysis. Comparable sales of improved properties should be considered. Small sample of sales may be unduly selective. Sales considered should be similar. The Commissioner determined that the land value at 1.89 million from the original decision of 1.95. So this court case in relation to finishing up with the value of the the vacant land value of the property is not huge. As you remember, the original site value, I think, was $2.4 million. It got adjusted down to 1.95, and then when it came back from the High Court, it only got adjusted to 1.89. So it's not the valuation itself that was in dispute or that came out of this court case. It was the process that you go through to determine a value of a property. And the High Court had to remind us that the basic techniques are the best. So that's why we look at Merici pretty closely, because it just reminded us of the basic valuation processes that we've been taught for over many, many years, even forgotten by the Valuer General in New South Wales in determining values of properties across the state, had to be reminded of how to do that in a better way.
Gino, is there a reason why New South Wales only value the land rather than the improved value? Like, what was the main reason of it doing that?
Sorry, Godfrey, could you just say that again?
What's the main motive of just valuing the land and not the improve in New South Wales?
Why do they do it?
Yeah, why don't they just follow like Victoria one? Because that's
Yeah, well, so New South Wales was established before Victoria, so they didn't follow us. They did their own thing, and I'm not sure why the differences had occurred. Someone came up with the idea, and these are some of the systems that are adopted around the world. Even some of those, when I spoke about the history of property rates and taxes thousands of years ago, some countries just used vacant land value, so they didn't necessarily take into account the improvements. New South Wales historically came up with that approach. They decided that they would only value land in Victoria. Now, I don't know who made the decision in Victoria, but someone decided, I think it's going to be a better system if we include the improvements. Now, whether they thought they were going to get more money, it's not about getting more money from property rates and taxes if you value improvements. It's just a different reapportionment. It's difficult to say why, but there was after Merici, there was a Royal Commission into the way valuations were done in New South Wales. Now, the Valuer General's office in New South Wales not only does the rating and taxing valuations, similar to Victoria now, they also do compensation valuations. So when the Royal Commission did their investigations, they found that it's not only the rating and taxing valuations that were a little bit questionable, they were inaccurate, but it was also their compensation valuation. So if they took your property, there was less chance that that valuation was 100% correct, because the valuers were doing the same valuations. The valuer was doing the rating and taxing valuations. They would also do the compensation valuation. So again, if you're concentrating on just land values or land sales in one aspect, you're not going to be fully informed as what you should be when you're doing the compensation valuations. So the Royal Commission, the investigations that happened through the Royal Commissions, came up with a recommendation that they should follow the Victorian model and start valuing all their improvements. Good suggestion, but in reality, how would you do that? Now, we've got 3 million properties in Victoria and growing, and New South Wales, I think, have got a bit more than that. So let's say 3.5 million. How would you go about all of a sudden? Now, we've got all information in our computer systems in relation to improvements. As I said to you last week, I think, or no, the week before, size of the improvement, size of the house, when it was built, construction material, type of roof, number of bedrooms, number of rooms, quality, style, garage, sheds, all that sort of stuff, carports, size of the land, we've got that in computer system. How long would it take to build all that information up in New South Wales on the 3.5 million properties that they've got? They should have started, because the decision was to do that 10 years ago. And if they started that 10 years ago, they'd be closer to a much improved system. But it's just too large a task that nobody really wants to start collecting all that information on the improvements. So I think they're going to continue. Yeah, they've got no choice. They should start, but at the moment they'll just keep going. But they definitely got a kick in the backside with Merici. They've improved their system since then, so they took heed of the decisions that came out of Merici. So they're doing better quality valuations, but it took that court case to give them a bit of a wake up to understand what they need to do to return better quality valuations. So, any more questions on Merici? Make sure you have a look at those links. Make sure you're fully familiar with what Merici was all about. It's pretty basic stuff, but it's going to be really important for you for your assignment too, because I'll be asking you to explain in a valuation report, for example, why did you use $100 a square metre on the land? Now that seems pretty easy question, but you've got to determine why you used $100 a square metre for the land based on the sales. You've got to explain that, maybe in a full page. Why specifically did you use $100 a square metre? Why not 110 or why not 90? You've got to explain to me why that figure. And that's what Merici's all about, giving you justifications, explaining justifications why you use that specific figure. Sales that occurred before the relevant date of valuation and after the relevant date of valuation. What adjustments did you make for that? So have a good read of Merici. Make sure you understand the principles that come out of it. And if you want any additional explanations, just yell out and we can go over that again. Any questions before we leave that? We all good? Excellent. Okay, so this is just a snapshot of valuation stages for valuation, rating and taxing valuations in Victoria. Now, it's 2019 there. The specifications haven't changed since then. This is this is the first guidelines paper that came out once valuations moved to annually. So it's the same process. So it's made up of a few stages, and it shows you what stage you should be up to any point in time during the valuation process. So remembering that if you're doing a valuation as at the 1st of January, then it's got to be finished pretty much by April of the following year. So that seems like you've got a lot of time, 14 months, but with all the analysis and benchmarking that you're setting, you've probably got half that time to undertake a valuation. Now, if we look at a municipality like where I was at Whittlesea, you've got 90,000 properties to value each year using this process. So it can be quite demanding. But if you've got your systems in order, you can undertake it pretty quickly. So let's look at what stages you've got to do to undertake a general valuation. So a valuation of one municipality, and in Victoria we have 79 of them. So each valuation has to be done under this basis. So instead of 2019, let's say we're looking at 2022. So it's the next cycle that we're working on. So stage one has to be completed by the 31st of July 2021. So we've passed that date now. So that means every valuation in Victoria should have at least a stage one completion. Stage two has to be completed by the 31st of December 2021. So again, we've got September, October, November, December. We've got 4 months right now to complete stage two. Stage three has got a completion date of 28th of February 2022. That means we've got 2 months after the completion of stage 2 to complete stage 3. And then stage 4, which is the full valuation, that has to be completed on the 30th of April 2022. So they're the dates that we work from. And there's a lot of work that has to go in to finish those stages. So let's have a look at each stage in a bit more detail. So let's start with stage 1, which is well and truly completed now. So stage 1 is pretty much preparation. So preparing how we're going to undertake our next revaluation of the whole municipality. And that looks at coming up with a project plan. So any major project that anybody's involved in should include creating some preparation work. So project plan, pretty much standard now when you're doing a major project. The second step is data validation. So what's the best way to determine that your data is good? Well, if you're doing valuations, then and you've got basically 5 to 10% of properties sell in a particular area. So that means of 90 or 95,000 properties out at Whittlesea, for example, you're getting 5 to 10% of those that have sold. So that's, maybe 10,000 properties sold. The best way to check your data validation is how close those sales are coming up to your previous valuations. So the 2021 values have been completed. How close are you with those results? Now, data validation is a good way to determine whether you need some changes. So if a particular submarket group is coming under or over the sale price, then that's an opportunity for you to start making adjustments in the way you're doing it. And that might include looking at your submarket group and whether they need changes too. So stage 1 is all about preparation, doing some checks and balances to making sure that your previous valuations are coming up pretty close to sale prices. Stage 2 is about your analysis. Now you're getting stuck into doing some valuation work. So that includes doing inspections, data accumulation, analysis and modelling, which is what you are all doing at the moment as part of your assignment 1. You're starting to analyse sales and you're starting to come up with models. And what you're looking at for your models, you're looking obviously to get a close connection with sale price value. That's what we're trying to predict. So we're looking at the sales where you don't have the luxury of doing inspections, but out in the real world, they would get out and look at these properties, because sometimes you don't get a real feel for what a property, you might have the raw data in the size of the land, size of the house, all those details, but you really sometimes need to get a feel for why a sale price is too high or too low by going out there. You go out there and you see these massive transmission lines, power lines above the property, and you think, okay, that's why it sold for 20% less than everything else, because it's been affected. Sometimes those things are very difficult to pick up when you're just working off raw data. So certainly in the real world, inspections of all the properties, all the sales properties occurs, and then that results in better quality models being put together. Stage 3, application of those models, which again is something that I hope you have at least started to do with assignment 1, starting to apply the models to valuing the 8,000 odd properties that you've got to value, and looking at how close those values are coming up with those sale prices. So you're looking at valuation tolerances. I think last week we went through some of those statistical analysis. Now, I'm not asking you to do that with assignment 1. I think I've earmarked that you just concentrate on the adjusted R squared and try and get that as close as possible to 1, whatever that looks like. But again, in the real world, the valuation tolerances are more than that. We look at a lot more the checks and balances to measure how good our models are in comparison to actual sale prices. So stage 3 is about the application of those models. and looking at the valuations that they come up with and checking how close they are. Yeah. Okay, not sure what happened there. Okay, so stage 4, we're looking at quality assurance and return of the general revaluation. So that looks at the valuation return itself. Certification, we're looking at templates, we're looking at tasks and output summary. Again, we're looking at to make sure that we've valued all of the property. So again, with your stage 1, assignment 1, I've asked you specifically to value properties with a specific code. So that stage 4 would be ensuring that you valued all of those properties that you've been asked to value. So a bit of quality assurance in there, checking, and also looking at the return of the valuations and make sure that that project that you've been asked to do is completed. Just going back to the time frame. So there you go. Looking at stage 1, completed by the 31st of July. So it's already done. Your analysis, inspections, you've got a few extra months to do those. So they've all got to be finished on the 31st of December. And try and put your minds into, if we're looking at Whittlesea, 90-odd thousand valuations that you've got to finish. So from December, you've got 2. So you've done your analysis and your modelling. You've got a number of models for each submarket group. And stage 3 is the application of those models. So you've got 2 months, once you've got the models, to apply those models and make any adjustments to ensure by 28th of February all those valuations are completed. And then you're doing all your tidy up and make sure that you've valued all of your properties that you need to by the 30th of April. So very tight time frames. They're really tasks that require a lot of work. And I'm not sure whether anyone's looking for work, but a lot of the valuation firms that are doing these valuations are actually putting out ads for student valuers. So if anyone's interested, there's plenty of work out there. It's not easy work, it's very demanding work, but you can see why from these timeframes what needs to be done. And this is right across Victoria. As I said, we've got just over 3 million properties that have to be valued under this format. Any questions on that? So make sure you have a look at the specifications. You can get those documents all online, just Google them and make sure that they're Victorian valuation documents, and they'll give you more detail if you're interested in that to look at how evaluation is done. But I expect you in an exam setting to be able to explain how a mass valuation is done under the Valuer General's guideline principles. Any questions before we move on?
Gino, it's got a quick one. In terms of the timeline, just like to reiterate, so you start your valuable, because the valuation reports is sent out to the residents in the community at 1st of January, is that right?
Correct. Yep.
But then before that, you take like more than 1.5 years for them to do the report. Is that based on this timeline?
Yep, that's right. Well,
So,
that's if you start, that's assuming that you start on the 1st of January. Most valuation companies, so let me give you an idea of what the statutory value is going through right now. So the statutory valuer is definitely starting with the 22 valuations, but rate notices right across Victoria have been released. So the valuer is also getting calls from people who receive their rate notice. They ring the council and the council puts them through to the valuer to say, my valuation doesn't look right. Now, what they normally say, what they're normally asking is, why did my rates go up so much? And that's obviously because the valuation went up higher than the average in that particular area. So the valuer, the statutory valuer at the moment, is taking all those inquiries, a lot of those inquiries then result in objections, formal objections. Now, when a formal objection is lodged, and we'll go into this in very much a high level of detail next week's lecture. But when a valuation objection is lodged, then the valuer has to conform to what's in the legislation. So then it becomes a formal process, and they have to respond in a formal manner. That all takes time. For example, out at Whittlesea last year, there were 900 formal objections, and they all require formal responses. So the valuer takes a fair bit of time to do that. A lot of those objections, or most of those objections, are refused. There might be a small number that are changed, but most of them are refused. And then once they're refused, the property owner has the opportunity to go to court. So then when I say court, I'm talking a tribunal, VCAT. So the valuer has constantly got a lot of work on, and that's what they're doing right now, as well as starting the process for the 2022 valuation. So you're right, they did have a year and a half to do it, but a lot of that year and a half is taken up with other functions, as well as what we're covering in a minute, which is going to be supplementary valuations. So they've always got plenty of work on.
All right, cool, thanks.
So it sounds like they've got plenty of time, but most of them have probably just started the 2020 process recently. And they're probably now getting interrupted with objections on the 2021 revaluation that they've just completed. So they've certainly, at any one point in time, they've probably got 2 or 3 valuation cycles that they're dealing with. And even looking at the task today, how would you go about valuing properties that's affected by the current COVID-19 situation? Residential is pretty easy because most of us are pretty confident that the residential market has moved. So residential generally hasn't been affected by the global pandemic. But if you're valuing, so there's over 9,000 properties in Whittlesea, for example. There's probably approximately 5,000 commercial and 5,000 industrial valuations. How's the industrial and commercial market fared with COVID? That's going to be a bit more difficult to analyse. And even within the commercial market, there's probably properties that are increased in value and properties that haven't moved at all. Shopping centres. What's your shopping centre value move now? I mean, right now, in particular, no one's going to shopping centres, so the businesses are actually affected. So how do you think valuations of shopping centres? And it's not as if you've got a heap of sales that you can analyse. So picking the market for various sub-market groups, commercial, industrial, residential, recreational, is not an easy task. And with what we're going at the moment, it's even more difficult to try and estimate. So what the statutory value is probably not putting a lot of time into residential analysis because that's probably tracking pretty good, but it's probably putting a bit more effort into non-residential, the commercial industrial market, to try and figure out how that's actually moving since from January 21 to January 22. So plenty of work to do in relation to that. Godfrey's the only one asking questions. Anyone else got questions? Okay, moving on. Supplementaries. So every 12 months, a revaluation occurs on every single property in the municipality. So right through Victoria, any major changes to a property, there is a legal requirement to undertake what's called a supplementary valuation, an in-between valuation, something that's required to update the valuation because of the circumstances. So we're going to go through the legislation now, which I know is going to be a bit tedious, but this will give you a description as to when a supplementary has to be undertaken by the municipal, the statutory valuer. So we're talking about Section 13DF of the Valuation of Land Act 1960, which you should have already downloaded from the first class. So you should have that handy. So we're talking about Section 13DF, which deals with supplementary. So let's read each section of this section of the Act and then see if we're comfortable with when a supplementary valuation has to be undertaken. So let's start with subsection 1, which says, despite anything in this or any other Act, the person referred to in Section 13DA may carry out a supplementary valuation for the purpose of the Local Government Act 1989. So who can undertake a valuation? Someone who's accredited by the Valuer General Victoria to undertake these valuations. A supplementary valuation may be made in any of the following circumstances. A, if any land which should be included in a valuation then in force is not included. So that's reasonable. So if a property hasn't been included in a valuation, it can be a supplementary can be undertaken to include it. So that's pretty basic. Section B, if the value of the land is materially altered by the approval of a planning scheme under the Planning and Environment Act 1987 or an amendment to a planning scheme under that Act, or by the granting, refusal or cancellation of a permit under such a scheme. So who wants to have a guess at what that means? Anybody? What did Section B trying to tell us? No?
And land rezoning?
Beautiful. Anytime land is rezoned, has to undertake a supplementary to include that new zoning. So, for example, the farmer that I've been talking about for the last couple of weeks, he might have been, or she might have been included in a conservation zone or a green wedge zone, which allowed the property to be farmed. And then all of a sudden they're in a residential development zone. So that's, again, the example I've been talking about last couple of weeks. Their value goes from $5 million as a farm to $50 million as a residential development site. How do you reckon that supplementary valuation is going to go down? I mean, the farmer may or may not be happy because of the increase in their property, but they're certainly not going to be happy with the accompanying increase in rates because of that. So that's section, and it's not just rezoning; it's also the issuing of a permit. So there's a homemaker centre in Thomastown that's on industrial land, and commercial use is not permitted in on industrial land unless there's a permit. So this homemaker centre has a permit to have a commercial activity on there. So that circumstance would require a supplementary valuation to take into account that new allowed use. So any changes in zoning and any permit that's been issued, that requires a supplementary. C, if by reason of sale of lots, any land in respect of which two or more persons are liable to be rated has been valued together as rateable land. So that's more of a contiguous reason, a number of lots in a property. D, if by reason of the purchase of land or any other cause, any land in respect of which only one person is liable to be rated has been valued as if more than one person was liable to be rated. That's more a rating basis, not a valuation. E, if any land has become rateable since the return of the existing valuation. So we covered a couple of weeks ago which properties are rateable and which properties are non-rateable in particular. So if you had a property that was occupied as a school or a church, and then for some reason that use stopped and that became rateable, then that requires a supplementary valuation to be undertaken. G, if by reason of the following, so we'll go A1, any building on land being included in the Heritage Register as established under that Act. So we're now talking about historic properties, and if they're included in the register, that has an effect on value. Let me ask you, what sort of effect on value would being included in a Heritage Register would have on a property? Who wants to have a guess?
Value reduction, because there are more limitations on the development on the property.
Excellent answer. Absolutely. So if you've thought that supplementary valuations was all about increasing value, you're mistaken. This is supplementary valuation process is meant to create a fairer system. So not only, yes, you're right, in most cases it's going to be dealing with increases in value, but it also conversely deals with any major decreases in value. So if you've got a property, which specifically if it's a development property, and all of a sudden the house on there is included in the Heritage Register, that substantially diminishes the development opportunity of that property and development value, potential value. So the rates would then go down as well. Any building ceasing to be included in the Heritage Register established under that Act, so that's the opposite, if a property is no longer included. The issuing of a permit under the Heritage Act 1995 to remove, demolish or alter a building included in the Heritage Register established under that Act, or to subdivide or develop any land, capital improved value, net annual value or site value of that land has been materially decreased or materially increased. So that includes both scenarios. A supplementary must be carried out. H, if by reason of the destruction or removal of a building or other improvements on land, or by reason of any physical changes of a permanent nature to land or improvements, or by the making of roads or any other work of man, or by adverse natural causes, the capital improved value, net annual value or site value of that land has been materially decreased. Okay, what's that trying to say? Basically, any demolition of a building. So a house gets demolished, a factory gets demolished, or a shop gets demolished, a supplementary valuation has to be undertaken to decrease the value of that property. So that's section H. Section I, if any land or part of any land is burdened by a covenant. Who can tell me what a covenant is? Covenant, anybody?
An additional, like, it could be a restriction on the property.
Yep. So covenants are restrictions. So any restrictions that are added under Section 3A1 of the Victorian Conservation Trust Act 1972, or if upon variation or release of such covenant, the capital improved value, net annual value, or site value of that land has been materially decreased or materially increased. So again, both ways, depending on the effect of that particular covenant, requires a supplementary valuation. If by reason of the erection or construction of a building or other improvements on land, or by reason of any physical changes of a permanent nature to land or improvements, or by the making of roads or any other work of man, or by favourable natural causes, the capital improved value, net annual value, site value of that land has been materially increased. So again, the opposite of the section we just read. That section dealt with the demolition of buildings. This deals with the construction of buildings. So the scenario I mentioned earlier, where you've got vacant residential allotment and a house is constructed, that requires a supplementary valuation to be undertaken. K, if there has been a change in occupancy which affects the net annual value of the land. I should have mentioned that the use of the word land doesn't mean vacant land. Land in this scenario means property. So if there has been a change in occupancy which affects the net annual value of the property, that needs to be undertaken as supplementary. L, where the value of any land has been determined on the basis that an associated water share in relation to that land is deemed. So we're talking about the Water Act now. We're talking about rural farming properties with irrigation. And if there is a water share that's increased or decreased, so as you can imagine, rural properties are only valuable if they have access to water. So if that access to water is affected, there'll be an associated increase or decrease in the value of the property, and that requires a supplementary to be undertaken. So that's covered in that section. If by reason of the sale, transfer or conveyance of any land, or the transfer, surrender or expiration of a lease of any land, there are on the land any of the improvements described in paragraph B of the definition of improvements in section 2A, which were not made by the person who is owned or occupier of the land. So that's changes to land made by a tenant, has to be taken into account. N, if for any reason other than a reason referred to in any of the paragraphs A to M, the capital improved value, the net annual value or the site value of any land specified by the order of the Governor in Council published in the Government Gazette, or of the land in any area specified by the order of the Governor in Council published in the Government Gazette, or is likely to have been materially altered as a consequence of any act, proclamation, order in Council, regulation, bylaw or local laws. And the final one is O, if any arithmetical error has been made in calculating any valuation upon which any rate is payable, or if by reason of any error in describing the land or other matter relating to the land or any improvements to it, an incorrect valuation has resulted. So arithmetical error. What describes an arithmetical error, do you think? No one wants to have a go? Arithmetical error. Okay. All right. The only way I'm going to get you guys to talk, I think, is to offer you some bonus points. So here is your first bonus point possibility. Now, how do we manage this? Okay, the first person who emails me at Melbourne Uni email address after 9 o'clock tomorrow morning. So that's going to give you some time to look at it. You don't have to do it straight away. And only for those that are interested, but you're going to get bonus marks on your end of year mark. So there is a VCAT tribunal case, we'll call it a court case, dealt with arithmetical error. The first student who emails me the court case that I'm thinking about gets bonus marks after 9 o'clock tomorrow morning. Okay, we'll see how that goes. And then I'll come back to that next week and we'll have a little bit of a catch-up session on what constitutes an arithmetical error. Section 3, any supplementary valuation when returned and certified by the Valuer General under Section 13DF must be treated as part of the valuation in force and has the effect of cancelling anything contained in the existing valuation which is not consistent with the supplementary valuation. I mean, there are a lot of words. What do they actually mean? They actually mean that if once a supplementary is made, then it cancels out the valuation that was made previously. So I've got a valuation that I've got on my rate notice at the moment, which shows my property as vacant land. When I get my next valuation in a couple of months' time with the new house on there, it cancels out that previous one. That's all that section means. 3A, despite subsection 3, the council that caused the supplementary valuation to be made for the purposes of levying or adjusting a municipal rate, use the supplementary valuation before it is certified by the General. Just means the council can use that before the Valuer General certifies it. If a supplementary valuation has been made in any of the circumstances referred to in subsection 2 other than paragraph O, which deals with the arithmetical error, the amount of any rate payable in relation to that land must be calculated, and it tells you how to do it. So what does that mean in plain English? So I've got a rate notice at the moment with my vacant land value on it, and that commences from the 1st of July this year. So that's the rate has been calculated on vacant land. As of the 1st of October, let's say, my house is completed and the council valuer undertakes a supplementary. They will start that valuation from the 1st of October till the 30th of June. So what that section in the Act means is that I get from the 1st of July, August, September, so I'll get 3 months of the vacant land value in my rates, and then 9 months of the supplementary valuation. So it's calculated on 2 bases. So that's how they update the rates proportionately. Does that make sense to everybody? Yep. So section 5, if a supplementary valuation has been made in circumstances referred to in subsection 2O, the council may adjust the rate payable retrospectively for any period it considers just. So whilst it's required to undertake the valuation from the date that the house is completed in this example that I'm covering you, in relation to the arithmetical error, the council has the ability to backdate that to any date they see fit. So that's a difference with an arithmetical error valuation. That's why I wanted to raise that with you to make sure you fully understood what that included. The value in making a supplementary valuation must, A, have regard to the general levels of value under which the valuation in force within the municipal district or ward was based. General levels of value, that says it in legislation. They must be aware of the general levels of value. B, assess the value that the land to which the supplementary valuation applies would have had if at the time of which the last valuation of the municipal district or ward was made had been in the condition in which it is at the time of the making of the supplementary valuation, having regarded to every circumstances which affects the value of the land at the time of the making of the supplementary valuation, if it is a circumstance requiring the making of a supplementary valuation of land under subsection 2. Anyone want to explain what that means? Or if I give you bonus marks? Right now. Okay, so what does that mouthfuls mean? All right, so I get a rate notice on the 1st of July for my property, which is vacant land, and the valuation on there is 200,000 because that's the vacant land value of my lot. Now that value represents the value as at the 1st of January 2021, correct? Everyone got that? Okay. I then come along and build a house, and that's completed on the 1st of October. What that section in the Act says is that the valuer has to still continue to use the level of values of the 1st of January. So even though the house is there on the 1st of October, what would that property have been worth with the new brand new house constructed? What would that property have been worth on the 1st of January? So you've got to almost transport it back in time and say, okay, brand new house on that block of land, what would that have been worth? So you've got to continue to use your general level of values that you've arrived at and your models to represent the value as at the 1st of January that year. Does that make sense to everybody? Any no's? Yell out. You sure? All right, let's keep going. Subsection 7, a person who is qualified or authorised to make a supplementary valuation, or if that person is not available, Chief Executive Officer of the Council may delete from a valuation return any entry for rateable land if the whole of the land has become non-rateable. So we spoke about those definitions of non-rateable. So if a property was a normal residential property dwelling, is purchased by the local church and is used as a manse or rectory by the priest or the minister of religion, that property then becomes non-rateable and is effective from the date that that person occupied the property. So again, if the priest or the minister came in to occupation of that dwelling on the 1st of October, then it would become non-rateable from the 1st of October. Okay? The valuer must make entries on the return showing any alteration made on supplementary valuations or on any on an adjustment or determination of VCAT or the Supreme Court under Part 3 for as long as the valuation remains in force. Okay, so let's just cover what supplementary valuations is all about. So anytime there is any of these changes in between the 1st of January, any years, then we require a supplementary valuation to be undertaken. So change to the Planning and Environment Act 1987 or a planning permit. So what does that mean? Any rezoning of land. Anytime land is rezoned or has a new planning permit issued, supplementary. Sale of part of land which is previously assessed as one. So land has been split by ownership, supplementary. If land becomes rateable, supplementary. The property is included in the Heritage Register or a permit is issued under the Heritage Act, supplementary is needed. Any changes to buildings, improvements and or land, any changes to those three things, supplementary required. Creation or variation of a covenant, supplementary. Any occupancy change, supplementary. Any arithmetical error, supplementary is needed. Subdivision or consolidation of land, supplementary is needed. Construction of or addition to or demolition of any building or any improvements on the land, then you require a supplementary. Rezoning of land or creation or removal of a planning permit, I think we already covered that, but say that again, that's fine. Consolidation of or splitting of a building through different occupations, that determines a supplementary. So are we all clear on supplementaries and what they mean from in between revaluations? They need to be done to update the valuation that's been already returned. There's a weird section in the Valuation of Land Act as well. This is where some of the contradictions come into play that I've already spoken about. So Section 5A in legislation determines all the things that a valuer, and this is to do with any valuation, not just a statutory valuation. So Section 5A, in determining a value of land, unless otherwise expressly provided where pursuant to the provisions of any act, a court, board, tribunal, valuer or other person is required to determine the value of any land, every matter or thing which such court, board or tribunal valuer or person considers relevant. So that section says that anything relevant to a valuation needs to be taken into account. Subsection 2, in considering the weight to be given to the evidence of sales of other lands when determining such value, regard shall be given to the time at which such sales took place, the terms of such sales, the degree of comparability of the lands in question, and any other relevant circumstances. So again, it's telling the court, the legislation is telling the valuer what needs to be taken into account. Without limiting the generality of the foregoing provisions of this section, when determining such value, there shall, where it is relevant, be taken into account the use to which such land is being put at the relevant time, the highest and best use to which the land might reasonably be expected to be put at the relevant time and to any other potential uses. The effect of any act, regulation, local law, planning scheme, or other such instrument which affects or may affect the use or development of such land. So that's listing all of the things that you need to take into account when undertaking a valuation. The shape, size, topography, soil, quality, situation, and the aspect of the land needs to be taken into account. The situation of the land in respect to natural resources and to transport and other facilities and amenities has to be taken into account when doing a valuation. The extent, condition and suitability of any improvements on the land and the actual and potential capacity of the land to yield a monetary return. So the legislation specifically spells out not all the things, but most of the things that need to be taken into account in any valuation. So that covers supplementary valuations and everything else that needs to be taken into account in a valuation under the Valuation of Land Act. Any questions on that? No? So in a classroom, I'd see your faces and I'd know whether you understood what I was saying or not. Online, it's very difficult to do that. So I'm taking your word that you understand the material I have covered. But if you haven't, after today's class and during the week, let me know and we can go over any of this material again. Okay. So the second court case I wanted to talk to you about is an important one in that it, I think it best describes the difference between the valuation under the capital improved value scenario or definition as compared to doing a valuation under the Spencer principle, which is full market value. And this was a tribunal case that, again, I was involved in. It involved a homemaker centre in Thomastown, but I think it gives you a good indication as to why understanding the difference between capital improved value and Spencer definition is important. And I've given you a link to the decision that came out of this particular court case. Okay, so the property in question is known as the North Point Homemaker Centre and it's located at 187 Settlement Road, Thomastown. So the court case was between 187 Settlement Road Proprietary Limited, which are the owners of the Homemaker Centre, and the Whittlesea Council. The objection lodged was to all three levels of value, so that's capital improved value, site value, net annual value. And the relevant date of valuation, it's going back a bit now, but the 1st of January 2010. Now this is where it gets interesting. So I did the valuations for council and I said the property was worth 24 million. The owner, on the other hand, said that I had it all wrong and that the valuation of the Homemaker Centre was only just a little bit under $10 million. Now, when he lodged an objection, as required under the Act, I had to give an opportunity to have a discussion, and we'll go over the process of dealing with objections next week. But the legislation says that when an objection is lodged, the statutory valuer has to talk to the objector to understand their point of view. So the discussions at the start went something along this line. So the owner said to me, if I put this Homemaker Centre on the market, which he'd already tested the market, not in official capacity, but he put feelers out as to what offers he might get for the Homemaker Centre. And he said to me, the best I can get is about $10 million. Now, I said to him, and this is where it all fell apart, I said to him, I totally understand that on the open market, this Homemaker Centre would only get the maximum offer of $10 million. So he said to me, well, if you agree with that, why have you valued this centre at 24 million? And I wasn't able to convince him of the reason why I had to value it at 24 million, even though I agreed that it's only worth 10 million if you put it on the market. And these are some of the reasons as to why that difference in valuation approach exists in the statutory environment as compared in the market environment. And let's see if I can convince you as to why. So let's go through some of the property attributes of this Homemaker Centre. So the subject property, the Homemaker Centre, was built in 2006, and it had a gross floor area of 15,273 square metres, so quite a large size Homemaker Centre, and on land that totaled 3.71 hectares, which was industrially zoned. And as I mentioned earlier, Homemaker Centre on industrial land is not allowed unless a permit exists. So in this case, a permit did exist for a Homemaker Centre. Now, every Homemaker Centre, so every commercial development like this, needs a strong anchor tenant. The anchor tenant is the main tenant in a commercial development, which brings in most of the people, why they come. And then the whole centre benefits from that. But you need a really strong anchor tenant to have a successful commercial property. In this case, the owner made the mistake, and it's always good to be able to see that mistake in hindsight, but difficult to see it at the start of this project. But the owner's first mistake was to allow Gainesville as their anchor tenant. Now, for those of you who don't know who Gainesville is, you might want to Google it at some stage, but they are high-end residential furniture for houses. But I'm talking about a standard chair would be a couple of $1,000. A standard couch would be, $5,000 to $10,000. So they're high-end retailer. So in my opinion, was never going to be successful in a suburb like Thomastown, which generally has low-level socio-economic residents in there. So then I don't think they were ever going to trade really well in an area like Thomastown. So why did Gainesville want to come there if they weren't going to trade all that well? Well, from Gainesville's point of view, they really use this store as a storage, not necessarily as a sales. Because it was close to Tullamarine Airport and some of the northern linkages through ring roads, they thought that was a great location for their distribution centre. So they were using it more as logistics. And so the owner, to get them in there, really offered them cheap rent to get them, because he thought as an anchor tenant they would really make the centre successful. Unfortunately, it was exact opposite. He chose the wrong anchor tenants. So because they were high-end retailers, not many people came there. So that centre struggled from day one. And some of the information that I want to share with you, rents in the centre range. Rents in the area. So in Thomastown, generally, commercial properties were renting from somewhere between $90 to $200 a square metre. However, in the Homemaker Centre, they were consistently around the $50 per square metre mark. So the owner wasn't getting high rents for them. The most comparable sale was just up the road, not far from this property, the Thomastown Homemaker Centre, which was in Settlement Road as well. That actually sold in November 2009 for $26.75 million. And that was for 16,500 square metres, so a little bit bigger than the subject. And it was on land of 4.2 hectares and showed a return of $2.75 million in rent, which equated to 10.25% capitalisation rate. So I had a pretty good sale up the road of something similar that sold around that, mid-20 mark. So what happened as far as the VCAT decision goes? So VCAT pretty much agreed with my view of the world, and these were some of the points that came out of the VCAT case. So the valuer has to have, the VCAT decision said that the valuer has to have regard to Section 5A of the Valuation of Land Act, which is what we've just covered, all those things that a valuer has to take into account. But they said more specifically, you have to take into account highest and best use and any potential use on that land. Relevant case law is telling us that the valuation exercise, and this is VCAT saying, what we must carry out is ultimately a hypothetical valuation of the value of the subject property as at the 1st of January 2010. Hypothetical valuation. So it's not the valuation that actually exists at the moment, it's a hypothetical valuation. So what would happen in the case of that property being valued under capital improved value definition rather than the Spencer scenario. So that's why that difference is important to understand. Applicant urged main valuation. So this is the owner of the property. They argued that the main valuation should be focused on ascertaining the value of the subject property in terms of the particular rental history of this particular landlord. So the property owner was saying to VCAT, you need to value this property with what I'm obtaining in rents on that particular property. VCAT didn't agree with that assertion because that's not the valuation exercise for statutory valuations. For under capital improved value definition, we don't do that. The 5-page witness statement prepared by the applicant's valuer, so that's the property owner's valuer, did not include any comparable sales evidence. So the valuer representing the property owner, they just produced information in relation to what the rentals were being achieved in the property. They didn't look outside of the property. And VCAT said, no, you have to look at what rents are being determined in the rest of the Thomastown commercial industrial area. Don't just look at what's happening on the subject. You've got to look elsewhere. What's the market for that particular type of property? A summary of the subject property's tenancies as at December 2009, so a rental schedule was given to VCAT, was provided by the applicant's valuer, however excluded the usual lease information such as commencement date of the lease, options, method of review. So a lot of the detail was left out by the owner's valuer. The owner's valuer's report provided an analysis that stated discussions with locally active sales and leasing experts resulted in his opinion that the adopted yield, capitalisation rate, was in the range of 9.5 to 10.5%. Then in presenting his evidence referred to splitting the difference and applying 10%. So what does that mean? Rather than using actual sales evidence, the valuer said, look, in talking to real estate agents in the area, they told me that the capitalisation rates of this type of property were somewhere between 9.5% and 10.5%. So I've used the middle 10%. VCAT was very critical of that and said, no, you can't make those sort of inferences. You've got to have your evidence that shows that. And again, this is very important for you to understand when undertaking assignment 2, because you're going to be required to act as an expert witness in determining the valuation of a particular property, and you're going to have to do it in the way that VCAT wants you to do it as a valuer. The property owner's valuer's report also stated that investigations had revealed typical rentals for commercial properties, such as the subject, appeared to lie in the range of between $50 to $70 per square metre, but then stated he relied on actual rentals and not evidence. So again, the property owner's valuer used rentals that actually occurred in the subject property within the homemaker centre, didn't use any evidence outside. And again, VCAT was critical of that. The applicant did himself no favours with its prospects of successing in terms of the haphazard. So the property owner's case that they put to VCAT was not very professional. They thought that my approach to the valuation was just ridiculous, in that I agreed that if they put the property on the market, they'd only get $10 million, but under capital improved value definition, that it was worth much more than that, almost, $15 million more. So why is that? Let's look at the decision specifically that came out from VCAT. We expected very reasonable for the tribunal to expect parties in the lead up to a hearing to prepare an organised and coherent case. Expert witnesses similarly are expected to prepare their reports in accordance with requirements and to be mindful of their ultimate duty to assist the tribunal through an independent and expert assessment of the key issues arising. It needs to be understood that this is not an ordinary commercial property valuation exercise before the tribunal. So a statutory valuation is not an ordinary valuation. Rather, this is a statutory valuation exercise driven by the relevant requirements and definitions in the Valuation of Land Act 1960 and the leading case law. In particular, there needs to be a recognition of the fact the definitions include the words, and this is extremely important, unencumbered by any lease, mortgage or other charge. In our view, it would be quite unworkable for the statutory valuation review process to be dictated by the actual rent received situation as opposed to the analysis process which assess the rental due to be payable. Okay, so what does that mean? This Homemaker Centre made the fatal mistake of getting the wrong anchor tenant, and that just created a terrible scenario for the whole centre. Now, I knew that, and the property owner knew that. So, but what I failed to be able to convince the property owner that when I'm doing my valuation, I have to pretend that the Homemaker Centre did not have that particular anchor tenant. So I've got to assume that Gainesville is not there, because the Act says I am to not take into account any lease that is encumbering the property. So because that's a rental, in my opinion, that's below market, I have to ignore it and pretend that all tenants within that centre are paying full market rent, which was not the reality. So under Spencer, the value of that Homemaker Centre is $10 million. But under the capital improved value, the value of that centre is 25 million or thereabouts, because I have to ignore the actual sitting tenants, and in particular, the poor choice of anchor tenant with Gainesville. Does that make sense to everybody? Because it's really important that you understand that difference in value, in definition, between capital improved value and Spencer. Again, no comment, so I will assume that you understand it unless you tell me otherwise. But if you want me to go through that again at any stage, I'm happy to do that. So that's the court case that I think, and have a look at the decision in full, which I've given you the link to. So make sure you read that, and you'll definitely be expected to answer that question in an exam situation, especially in this particular court case situation.
I'm sorry.
Go for it.
I'm just wondering, in terms of that $10 million that he got for his property, right? Wouldn't that say that his $10 million would be slightly biased to his lower side? Because like he said, like, because his intention is to get it as low as possible. So maybe he had already had the main thought to have it at the lowest. He might have had like 20 million offer came in, but he just didn't disclose it to you because he wanted to prove that.
No, I believed him, because the problem was that the market rent of all the properties is, when you compare it to what they're paying in the area, was, let's say, $100. They should have been getting $100 a square metre for all of the rents that they were getting. What they were getting was $50 a square metre. Now, the reason they were getting $50 a square metre is, first of all, the poor choice of anchor tenant, and Gainesville had signed a 25-year lease. So they were there for a long time. So if I was an investor looking to buy that particular property, yeah, I'm only going to pay $10 million because I'm only going to get $50 a square metre rent return on the whole centre for many, many years. I'm not going to get any possibility of that. But under capital improved value, I can forget all that. I can say, no, it doesn't matter that they're only getting $50 a square metre. I'm going to look at what the market in the area tells me they should be getting, and the market actually tells me that they should be getting $100. So that's double the rent. So that's why there's such a huge difference. Now, there's a couple of questions you should be asking yourself. First question is that fair? Is it fair that he has to pay rates on $25 million property value when under Spencer, it's only $10 million? That's the first. So remember at the start of this subject, I said there are the disadvantages of this current rating system is that you have to ignore established valuation principles. And this is one of those that you have to ignore. Now, is it fair? No, it's not fair. But if we have to, so 90,000 properties in Whittlesea, this was one of them. If you value them under Spencer, there's no way known you can get it done in that 18-month period. It's going to take you twice as long. Whereas under capital improved value, all the value has to do is establish the general levels of values and then apply those right across the board. And if you think of doing it under an Excel spreadsheet where you do your analysis and you come up with a model, then you apply the model, that's a much easier exercise and more accurate than trying to take into account all of the actual leases in all of the commercial industrial properties, which is going to take you, twice as long to do. So because it's a mass valuation, the process is to ignore current lease conditions that are unfair, that are away from the market, and just assume everything is every tenant is paying market rent and value it on that basis. So it isn't a fair system, I agree with that, but it's the best system we can come up with to undertake the valuations in the required time frame and to return accurate valuations on a year-to-year basis. As I said to you, there are cracks in the system, and this is one of the obvious ones. Does that answer your question, Godfrey?
Yeah. Thanks.
Okay, so let's finish up by looking at the valuation codes. I won't spend a lot of time on this, but a number of years ago, it was determined that Australia should introduce a standard property coding system so that would help with statistics across the nation. So we'd have a better way of measuring what the properties are in each of the areas. So we now have this uniform coding system right across the country where every single property in Australia has one of these codes, and it's a pretty basic system. So the 100 numbers are all residential. The 200 numbers are commercial, 300 numbers are industrial, 400 numbers are extractive industry, 500 numbers are primary production, so rural farming properties, 600 numbers are infrastructure and utilities, 700 numbers are community services, 800 numbers sport, heritage and cultural properties, and 900 numbers national parks, conservation areas, forest reserves, and natural water reserves. So these are the broad-based codes that we use in our statutory rating bases, databases rather, and every property in Victoria, but right across Australia has one of these numbers. So that's I think it's a good system that we've got a uniform code on every single property in the country. The most recent brand new levy to be introduced that's property-based is the fire services property levy that was introduced a number of years ago, and it's a system that replaced the system that was in place to raise revenue for our fire and emergency services. So in the past, it used to be based on your insurance policy. So those buildings that are insured, you had to pay a premium. That was deemed to be a silly system. So now we've got every property in the state of Victoria pays a fire services levy based on their capital improved value, and it's added onto the rate notice. It's collected by every council, and then the money is passed on to the state government to provide funding for our fire and emergency services. So that's fire brigade, emergency services in Victoria is covered by this particular levy that's raised specifically for that purpose. And the sort of rates that we're talking about, they're broken up into residential, commercial, industrial, primary production, public benefit, vacant, excluding vacant residential land. And there's a fixed component and a rate per dollar based on the value of CIV. What does that mean in English? So if we talk about a value, a CIV of 750,000, then the residential, so we're not talking huge money, but the residential property would pay $158. Commercial, though, would pay $726. Industrial, $906. A farming property, although there's not going to be too many farming properties that only have a value of $750,000, but they will pay $386. Public benefit type properties, $277, and vacant, $329. So that's added to the rates and collected by the council and then sent to the state government. So that's all I wanted to cover in tonight's lecture, which is pretty good because that's 2 hours, just about gone. So the next hour I have allocated for you to ask me questions on assignment 1 or any other questions that you might have.
Dino, sorry, just a quick one in terms of this fire levy, right? I'm just noticing the rates. Why is vacant land so expensive? Because there's nothing on it.
So this is not residential vacant land, this is commercial industrial vacant land. So if we go back up to the definition, if you look here, vacant land excluding vacant residential, so everything else. So, but you're right, why is that assessed at such a high rate? Well, the government, that's just the government's decision that if you've owned vacant land, industrial or commercial vacant land, that's the sort of figure you should be paying for fire services levy. But if it is vacant and it doesn't have a building on it, then you're not going to need the fire brigade to come and do anything. So why are you paying? But that's just the decision that the state government has made. No logic to it. That's just how they do it. Okay, assignment 1 or anything else. How are we going with assignment 1?
Gina, can I have a question regarding to the supplementary valuation? I forgot to ask it before. So when you were saying like there was a permit, like, you know, when there's a permit attached to it, then you can do a supplementary valuations, right?
Yeah.
But only for industrial and retail, would that happens to residential as well?
Yep, yeah, absolutely. So that's a good point. So let's say you've got a property, a large vacant development site, and you've got a permit for now to subdivide 50 lots. That's going to be worth a bit, don't you think?
Yeah.
Because it saves somebody a developer going to the effort. So if you had 2 properties, 10 hectares of vacant residential land, one didn't have a permit, the other one had a permit, the one with the permit would always sell for much more, wouldn't it?
Yeah.
So from a statutory rating valuation point of view, when a permit like that is issued, a supplementary valuation has to be undertaken to include the value of that permit. Now, the difficult nature of that, how much does a permit add to the value of a development site?
Just based on the permit, like how many
Yeah,
lots
but-
that you could build on that.
Yeah, but how do you?
Yeah.
Let's say both of those 10 hectare sites. Let's say the going rate for residential development land is $1 million a hectare, so they're both worth 10 million. And that second site today gets a permit for 50 lots subdivision. How much more than $10 million is someone going to pay for that?
It's not going to be that simple, right? Not going to be like just multiply. It should be, because even it's like 50 lots more, you're not just going to times 50, right?
Well, the correct answer to any of these questions is depends on what your sales are showing. So you would try and look for a sale of a property with a permit and determine how much extra that property was worth with the permit. So always, when you're stuck for an answer, always say sales, depending on what the sales shows, because 9 times out of 10, that's going to be a correct answer. So you would look at the sales, see how much they show as an increase, and you would apply that rate.
Yeah, I'm sorry. For another one, I was want to ask. So even there's nothing built yet, just like I just got the permit, but then I haven't built anything on the land, but the valuation will still be based on the potential, like the use of the land, right? Even though it's nothing on there at the moment.
Yep. So again, ask yourself, if you were going to buy a property and you had 2 properties, 10 hectares, one had a permit to develop, one didn't, which one would you buy? And the answer is obviously going to be the one with the permit, because you're going to be able to develop that quicker. But the question is, how much more would you be willing to pay with the one with the permit? Now, that's not always easy to answer, but as I said to you, the correct answer is, well, it depends on what the sales in that area shows, because some properties do sell with a permit, so you need to analyse that and work out what a permit adds. You know, for example, it might be that it increases the value from $10 million to $11 million, because someone would be able to develop that land much quicker than having to go through the process of getting a permit and subdivision and plans all put together. This is already done. So how much extra is that worth to the value of the property?
Yeah.
Sometimes not easy to answer, but the important thing is that the legislation requires a supplementary valuation in those circumstances to be undertaken. And not only does that increase the council rates, but more importantly, because the government really is more focused on land tax, that's going to increase the land tax of that particular development company, because they're going to get an amended bill, including that higher valuation. And we'll go into much more detail in how land tax works in not next week, but the week after class. So it's very interesting how land tax is actually established.
Also, another one is the supplementary valuations, like, are they triggered like if something changed like automatically, or is council just notifying you saying like, oh, we're gonna do a supplementary valuation thing on your land because you have a permit now? Is that something?
Yeah, so it's not council who does the valuations; it's the Valuer General Victoria, but they are accessing all of the permit information from every single council. So as soon as a permit is issued, it's not an automatic process, but it flags a change that's required, and the valuer then has to update the valuation based on that permit that's been issued. Yeah.
Thank you.
No worries. Good questions. Excellent. Any other questions on tonight's lecture material?
Gino, just continue with the value difference between the empty land and the land with the permit. So the land value will be different, but the CIV will continue with the land value, right?
Correct.
It won't.
That's a good point.
It won't be like assume you already built it.
No, that's exactly right. Does everybody understand that difference? So in that particular case, the side value and the capital improved value would be altered. So they'd still be the same, but they'd be higher than what they were previously.
Thank you.
Good point. What else?
I might have a question regarding to the Simon one. How do we do with the material, construction material? Do we need to like refer to like the index or like a construction standard to see the construction cost and put that standard cost to different material into the calculation using that number? Or
excellent
just,
question.
yeah,
Excellent question. Let's have a look. Everybody see that?
yes.
Just make it so it's a bit more legible. Okay. So in column G, we have so we've got a few. We've got brick rendered, brick veneer, brick veneer, fibre, cement, stone, tilt slab, weatherboard, and we've got blanks because there are probably they would include the vacant land, obviously. So how do we go about trying to mathematically capture something like construction material? So last week I touched on use of dummy variables. So what we need to do is allocate a numeric field to represent the construction material. So I think, from memory, the most common is going to be brick veneer. So let's let's undertake an experiment. So I'm just going to take the filters off. So I've created a new column, and I'm going to call that column just because it's the most common. So there's two ways of allocating a dummy variable. One is trying to allocate a number between 1 and 10 to each of the different construction materials, or you can use yes or no, which is 0 and 1. So we're going to try that one for a start and see how that looks. So I'm going to use a 0 and 1 in the brick veneer dummy variable column to determine whether a property is brick veneer or not. So that's a simple approach in that it's yes or no for a specific condition. So what I do is I will sort this database according to the construction material, and we're going to allocate something to that. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to put 0, populate 0 in the whole column. Okay? Does that make sense to everyone so far? And then I'm going to try and Okay, so these are the brick veneers here. So I'm going to put 1. So all that's doing is if it's brick veneer, it gets a 1. If it's not brick veneer, it gets a 0. So I can see there's a few with brick veneer, but okay, let's include the 1 there. Okay, I'm happy with that. So now I've got this dummy field column with 0 and 1, yes or no, whether it's brick veneer. So what do we do next? So first of all, I want to determine which sales I'm going to use. So let's pull out all the relevant sales. So I'm going to sort again by the sale date. And I'm going to go newest. So for this purpose, we'll go back to January. January going to be enough? Yeah, okay. So I've got 663 sales to play with. And I'm going to put them here. Okay, so now I've got 660 sales. And what I want to do is have a look at the improved sales. So we'll go to PCC at time of sale and see what that looks. Okay, so I'm going to delete all of the vacant land sales. Which is probably going to, so that's 170 odd. So we don't need those, so we delete them. That makes sense. Make sure we've got, townhouses. I might get rid of them. I'm definitely going to get rid of the shop and dwelling. Okay, so that's 481 sales. So that's not a bad cross section. All right. So let's do a simple correlation measure between sale price and our dummy brick veneer construction. So I'm going to extract that, put that here, and I'm going to copy the dummy variable and put it over there. And let's see what that does. So we're going to go to correlation. What do we want to measure? So we're going to highlight these labels in the first row. All right, so that's a surprising result. I thought it was going to be at least positive, but this tells us that that dummy variable that we introduced is showing a negative 0.11, 11%. So that's I suppose the process I wanted to show is how to introduce a dummy variable. That's the process, but the answer to me is surprising. So I would say that there are probably some quality control problems with this that shows that brick veneer is a negative impact on a dwelling, on a residential improved property sale. But I just wanted to show you the process of introducing a dummy variable to measure the construction type. Does that explain that process?
So just a question on that. Does the negative correlation symbolize that it has a negative impact on the price? Is that right?
Yes.
Okay. So, and if we were to do time, would you either obviously get a negative or positive correlation?
Yeah. So would you? So depending on how you set up your count of months that we talked about earlier. So if you did 1 to 20, depending on what 1 was, you're either going to get a positive correlation or a negative correlation, depending on how you're measuring time from here backwards or from the 1st of January 2020 to now. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Would you mind quickly showing just in a column, just the numbers, please?
Yep, we can do that.
Thanks.
So let's use these sales that we've got now, so we don't have to go through that whole exercise again. Okay, so which way did you go, Bella?
The one that you did, so like 2021 would be my start and then backwards.
So I did it the other way. That's okay.
I did whatever way you did in the lecture. I was
so the way I did last week, January 20 was month 1.
Okay.
But you can do it the other way.
I just think I had my data newest to oldest.
Okay.
I think that's what I can check.
So last sale date, you went newest to oldest. So I'm going to just insert a column here, and I'll call it of sale. Just so we know, we're going to do that red. Okay, so I think I mentioned to you last week that October date, so this is part of your cleansing exercise, which could really muck up your models if you don't cleanse the data. So that sale there is obviously wrong. I think that was an input error. That should have been October 20, but we're not going to take any chances, so we're going to delete that sale. So that's it. So you started with July being 1. June 2. So this is the way you did it?
Yeah. Yeah.
It's okay. Nothing wrong with that. It's fine. Perfect. Mathematically, it's perfect. Boring to watch this. No. Nearly there. So that's what you did?
Yeah.
Okay, so just before we do a correlation matrix, the other thing you might want to do to determine, and remembering these are just brick veneer sales, but they'd be the majority, is to check for trend just by doing Did I copy the whole thing when I did a sort? Do you remember? It looks as though I did. Yeah, I think so. So we're going to copy that. And we're going to put that there. All right, so I want to graph this just to have a look to see if I can find any trend. So I'm going to highlight that. And let's see if on a raw data basis, we can see an element of trend. So any trend?
Doesn't look like it.
Say again? Doesn't look like it.
Yeah.
All right. Let's do a cheat, and what I'll do is introduce a trend line. So Excel can tell us mathematically if there's any movement. Any trend?
Slight trend.
Slight.
It's a slight one.
Slight. Okay. Well, you know, it's a little. I think it's a bit more than slight. Let's zoom in. When you just zoom, nothing's changed other than it's zoomed into that point. But that, to me, that shows that the difference in value is from probably 560,000 to 675,000. So that's 100,000 movements in average. You know, this is average, so just take it with a grain of salt. But that's $100,000 increase in value. Bella, is that an increase or decrease in value?
So there's obviously an increase. Wait, you're talking about now, present?
When you're comparing January 20 to July 21, does that represent an increase or a decrease?
An increase.
Increase, correct.
Mm.
Yeah. It's just,
The reverse.
it doesn't make any difference, but from how my brain works, it should have been the other way around to show the movement going upwards rather than downwards. But if you've worked it out perfectly, so that's fine.
Okay.
So that shows an increase in value overall on a very raw basis of about $100,000. So to me, definitely the existence of movement in value over time, and this graph to me suggests that it should be captured. You should at least attempt to capture it in your model's time. Now the trick is, how do you apply that model in relation to, how do you capture time in your model? So again, the way you've done it there, Bella, mathematically exactly the same, but what you're trying to do is capture the movement in value over each month. Yours is going to show a zero or negative value in your model, which is fine. But you've got to understand that when you try and, so what everyone should be doing is determining the value of the property as at, what date did I say?
1st of January 2022. No?
No. I'm just reading the assignment. Your code is analyze your code pillar. Okay, so this is the relevant sentence. You are required to prepare levels of values analysed from the sales in preparation for the preliminary rating valuations to be determined on the properties of the submarket group. So you're not doing the final values. The assignment is that you're doing some preparation work to determine whether you're going to use regression analysis, whether your firm is going to use regression analysis when they do the final valuations as at 2022. So you're doing preliminary values. So if you're doing preliminary values, you're pretty much going to value it at today's date or thereabouts. So under your scenario, Bella, the date that you're valuing all the properties at is month number 1, right? So you're going to value all your properties at month number 1 in your model. When you come up with your model, that's going to show a negative value for time. So that just means that you'll be allocating a smaller negative value when you value all the properties as at for example, let's say the 1st of August. Well, actually, the 1st of August is going to be month 0, isn't it? So it won't have any subtractions made to it. So mathematically, it's exactly the same way, but written in a different format. So you will allocate a 0 to when you value every single property as at the 1st of August, and that's the value for the time element of the model that you come up with. I know that sounds confusing. Does everybody understand how you actually allocate that in your models?
Yeah, so it's if you're doing the other way, the oldest to newest, you'll be plus on wherever.
Correct.
Yeah.
No, so if you're doing it the other way around, the dates the months at which you're valuing all the property would be months 20. And so, but mathematically, it makes no difference. It allocating the exact same amount, just in a different way. It's just depending on how your brain manages that particular attribute, time. But mathematically, it's exactly the same. But just make sure that when you're valuing all of your properties, so they're two separate processes. The first process, you're analysing the sales. So a property sells in January 2020 for 500,000. When you go to value it for the 2022 preparation reval, and you're going to value it in August, it's obviously got to be worth more than that. It's probably going to be worth 600,000. So remember, there's a difference between the date that the property sold for and the valuation that you're doing at whatever date you choose for this exercise. Am I making sense or confusing?
Regarding to the relative date, I'm still confused about it because my notes from the last week, you mentioned it's 1st of July, 2022, but now you said the date we value it is today.
Yep. So I wouldn't have said the 1st of July, 2022. I would have said the 1st of January, 2022 is the next date.
1st of January, sorry.
January, yep. So this assignment is that, so you've got the job with this new firm. So you're the smartest guy in the firm. You know all about regression analysis. And the boss comes to you and says, oh yeah, I've heard about this regression analysis. I'm thinking of using it when we do our final values in January 2022. But can you show me now whether it works or not? So let's say we're going to do preliminary values, and we're going to do preliminary values on what the properties all are worth today, just as a check method. I just want to see what it looks like. So you're just choosing a random date, and that could be 1st of July 2021 or 1st of August, whatever date you like, and value and create a model and put that date in as the relevant date of valuation, and I want you to show me what the figures look like. That's all. So all you're doing is just an exercise to show the boss whether they should be using regression analysis as their main tool for the 2022 revaluation.
Yeah, so as long as we can input the date we wanted into the model, that's fine, right? So we don't need to define like today is the 0 or the earliest day.
You do whatever you feel. You do whatever you feel comfortable with. That's fine. Perfect.
Okay.
But just make sure you understand that. So I've got here in this spreadsheet, I've got 481 sales properties that are going to help me come up with the model. But I'm going to apply that model to all of the 8,236 properties. Does that make sense? So I'm valuing every single property, whether they've sold or not, on this new model that I come up with.
Yep, sure.
That makes sense to everybody? Because a lot of the students in previous years only valued those properties that they analysed the sales. But that's no good. I want you to value the whole submarket group.
I just have one question. So do we need only one model to like do all the property, or can I do like several models and then compare like which models were the best? Something like that?
So, yeah, absolutely. So I want you to try many different iterations and different models and then pick the best. Absolutely, that's how I want you to do it. And I want you to just pick the first one that you come up with. I want you to do various analysis, 3 or 4, 5 different models, and then pick the best one that you think shows you the best valuations.
And Gino, back to the construction material, the dummy variable you create is like if we have 4 different types of material, then we created 4 variables for different material, value at 0 and 1, right? Then
yeah, you could go on.
Then the regression results, if we use all of them, we will have a lot of like 7 or 8 variables. Should we reduce some of them?
Yep. So just creating the dummy variable doesn't necessarily mean you're going to use it in your model. So what you want to do is just do your analysis to measure each of those dummy variables to see which one's the most effective. Now, the correlation matrix is not necessarily the only tool that I would use to determine whether I should include a dummy variable. For example, even though that result showed me -11, I would still include that variable in a model and with other variables and to see how it looked. So don't just go on the correlation matrix result to determine. That's one way you can look at it, but I'd include it in models anyway and determine whether it improves or not improve the model that you're using. Because that, to me, that calculation seems a bit odd, that -11. Something's not quite right there. So I'd still use brick veneer as a variable and see what it does to various models.
Got it. So we don't need to like search for like Rawlinson's standard to replace the number.
No, everything you need is in the information I've given you. You don't need to go outside.
Oh, then if we don't need extra information, how do we use the address column?
So in years gone by, what I used to also include are the X and Y coordinates on a map of each property. And so I was asking students maybe to use a location factor, but that seemed to be too confusing for a lot of students to include that. So I don't do that anymore. So location with the address is very difficult to try and incorporate in the assignment that I'm asking you to do. So in reviewing this assignment, I've just created what I believe the basic information was, because the more information I used to give, you would confuse a lot of the students, especially those that are not as proficient in Excel as others. So that's why I've kept it basic. But I'd like to know if you've got a method of utilising location, yeah, by all means, include that and see what the model looks like. And if you're confident that that's improving the quality of your models, then yeah. Can you share with the class what you're thinking of doing?
I haven't done it. Just thinking of that, we don't have a lot of information in this Excel, no. So just think of using all of the information we got, not to anything.
Good. And I've done that specifically. As I said, in the past, I used to give a lot more information, but that seemed to be more confusing for students. So I've kept it, this year I've kept it pretty basic. And hopefully that makes the exercise a little bit easier. But if you want to do something different, go for it. Be looking forward to having a look at it.
Got it. Thank you.
Pleasure.
Gino, just in terms of the due date, I think it's due next Tuesday, if I'm not wrong. Yeah. Are we able to push that out by a week, maybe?
Yeah, okay. All right.
Thanks.
That's okay. No worries at all. I'll
Is everyone happy with that though?
Well, you don't have to stick to it. If you want to return something earlier, you can do it any time. So, Kayling, are you there?
Yes.
Can you do me a favour and put something on the announcements, pushing out the assignment one due date by an extra week, please?
Okay. And I see it from the LMS, the assignment column, the due date is set at 5 p.m. on 24th August, next Tuesday. Is that okay?
Well,
if we set it at 5 p.m.?
I'm gonna send Hal because he did it for me. I'm gonna ask him right now to push that out. So if we push it out by a week? What's that?
Sorry?
31st.
Actually, let's be consistent. Kayleen, can you send Hal so seeing as you're putting an announcement on, can you also make sure Hal extends that on LMS for us as well? Same date, please.
Oh, okay. The current day is set at 5 p.m. next Tuesday. So
Yeah, so can he? I'm sure he can alter that.
oh,
for
so
us.
the dates should be extended to.
The week after.
Oh,
Which one
okay. Okay.
What did you say, Isabella?
That's the 31st of August.
So can we make that the 31st, please, Kayleen? He's gone. Kayleen, you're frozen. So could you get that altered on LMS as well, please, Kayleen?
Oh, yes, I can change it now.
Thank you. Excellent. You're a star. There we go. So you don't have to adhere to it. If you want to include it early, that's fine. No worries at all. We feel a bit more confident in tackling assignment 1. Silence.
Gina, I've got a question in terms of the properties that we're supposed to be valuing, right? Like after we do our regression analysis and the models and all. So you're supposed to predict the other sales of the codes of the 100 and 110. Is that it? Or do we need to value all other codes? Because I noticed there's like parks and gardens that don't have any sales and all.
I just want you to value all the hundreds. So all the improved and all the vacant residential sites, 100, 110. Now that means you need at least 2 models, one for vacant land value, as you know, and one for improved. The ones that you don't value out of that 8,245, just put in there, not valuation not required, just so I know that you understand. So I want everything populated, but for those that are outside the parameter, just put in a comment in the valuation field, please.
Awesome. Thank you.
No worries. What else? Nothing else? You sure? We're all good to go?
For now, yes.
All right. Good luck. If you've got any questions in the meantime, don't be afraid to reach out to me. And if you need me to go over any additional material next week, let me know. And if you're struggling with some stuff, let me know that as well. I'm keeping the fingers crossed, and hopefully we meet in a classroom at some stage, but I'm just not sure. It's hard to predict what's going to happen. So good luck, everybody, and see you all next week.
And Gino, sorry.
Yep. The last question.
So I set the date. So I set the due date at 5 p.m. on 31st August. Is that correct?
Beautiful. Fantastic. Thanks very much for doing that.
Okay.
Thank you. They're all good to go.
Thank you, Gino.
Good night.
Nice.
Good night.
Bye.
Thanks very much. Catch you all.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye. Thanks, Kaylee. Thanks for that.
Thanks,
You're
Gino.
so
Also,
busy.
I'm just wondering if 5 p.m. is okay, because some in my previous tutorial, so students prefer to set it at 12 a.m. So they have
Okay.
several hours.
Yeah, okay. All right. If you can do that as well, that'd be
Okay.
fantastic. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Appreciate that. Thanks a lot.
Yeah,
Catch you
thank you
later.
so much, Gino.
All right.
So I will see you next week.
Yep. Catch you next week.
Okay, then. Goodbye.
Bye.